This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 1157 of Horse Tip Daily, your almost everyday morsel of helpful hints, useful facts, and practical techniques for horse folks, brought to you today by Kentucky Performance Products. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. For today's tip, we are reaching way back into the Horse Radio Network audio vault for a tip originally aired on the Horses in the Morning show back in 2012. Michelle Anderson, then digital editor of thehorse.com, and Dr. Jimenez offer up some do's and don'ts to keep in mind when natural disaster strikes. And we'll get right to our tip after this important message from Kentucky Performance Products.
The horse that matters to you matters to Kentucky Performance Products. Are you worried about digestive disorders such as colic, diarrhea, and ulcers making your horse sick? Try adding Nalox Advanced to your horse's diet. The ingredients in Nalox Advanced support a healthy stomach, robust microflora populations, and normal gut function, so digestive disorders become a thing of the past. Nalox Advanced is recommended for horses of all ages to maintain a healthy gut and reduce the risk of ulcers, diarrhea, and colic. Why take chances with your horse's well-being? Start your horse on Nalox Advanced today.
And that's the time of week when we bring Michelle from thehorse.com on, and she just espouses great information about how to keep your horses healthy with the help of some veterinarians and some experts from around the country. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Yeah, crazy weather all over the place, and we have Dr. Rebecca Jimenez with us, and she is the Horse 911 blogger on thehorse.com. She brings us really great and terrifying information about how your horses can get hurt and injured during natural disasters or human-made disasters. But today we're going to talk a little bit about weather and weather's effect on horses and horse owners. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. I'm actually down doing my military duty this week in Miami, Florida, so I don't understand what's the problem.
So, Rebecca, can you start out by telling us what a little bit about yourself, because you're doing military stuff right now, but you're very busy doing lots of different things.
Yes, ma'am. I'm the president of Technical Large Animal Emergency Rescue.org, and for almost 20 years we've been doing teaching to emergency responders, firefighters, veterinarians that get involved with disasters and emergencies, proper tactics, procedures, and techniques to try to help large animals in various distressful situations, everything from getting caught in flooding to overturned in a trailer wreck to entrapped by a wildfire or barn fire. So trying to get that kind of good information out to 911 emergency responders.
So you're the one, when there's a horse running down the street, that hopefully has trained the sheriff who is running after it. Or not running
Correct.
after it, if you've been trained
properly.
Yeah,
that's right. Exactly. Hopefully they're not running after it, but yeah, those are the kinds of things that we try to teach them, because what a lot of people don't understand, because we're horse people, is that especially in urban areas, many emergency responders do not have a horse background, and everything that they know about horses and cattle is via what they've watched on TV. And as we know, most things on TV are entertainment. They are not educational, and unfortunately that contributes to lots of problems.
And you're a PhD. What is your PhD in?
It is in animal physiology.
Okay. So let's start out with the weather. What kind of weather can affect horses and horse owners? Right now it's winter.
Yeah, the way that I usually try to explain these things is that wind, precipitation, heat, and cold. And it really comes down to everybody likes a little bit of wind and maybe a little bit of precipitation once in a while, and we sort of like it when it's warm and we like it when it's cool, but we don't like when things go too high or too low for any of those kinds of things. So tornadoes and hurricanes and flooding and drought are not usually something that most people enjoy, and neither do our horses.
And right now we are worried in parts of the country about cold weather and snowstorms and all the things associated with that. But what kind of things are we worried about during the summer and maybe those spring and fall? And I think you've mentioned them a little bit already.
Yeah, what was really funny is I always tell people that actually horses are very much better prepared to deal with cold than we are, since we are essentially naked, and they are not. And they usually have, if they're well taken care of, they usually have a nice layer of fat. But you're right. I mean, down here in Miami this week, it's 84 degrees, and it gets down to the low of like 79 or 80 at night. So, you bring a horse from up north down here for the racing season, it's got an adjustment period. So adjustment periods are something, since we have such a highly motile society with our horses, for showing, breeding, et cetera, we have to think about what is the effect can be on the horse when we take them to a new environment. And then obviously, in situations of extreme weather, how we're going to take care of that animal and better prepare them or protect them from the situation that they're in. That might be as simple as providing shade if it's too hot. It may be providing some insulation from the wind if it's too windy. But then, of course, when you start getting into an extreme weather, people are forced to make very difficult decisions on, here's a hurricane, am I going to evacuate or am I going to try to shelter in place? If you're going to shelter in place, what kind of facilities is the horse in? How high is the wind going to pick up? Is it going to be high enough that my poorly built pole barn is going to fall down on my horses, or is it a very well-built concrete barn with hurricane strapping? Those kinds of decisions are difficult for horse owners to make and probably going to be different in every single part of the country.
Yeah. And now you're mentioning some secondary things like barns falling down. What other issues can weather cause that aren't maybe the storm but are the follow-up to the storm that you have to deal with as a horse owner?
Exactly. Just like in Hurricane Katrina, the wind probably is not what killed a lot of horses. What killed them was the flooding that was afterwards. It may be as simple as flooding in your pastures may do a couple things. Obviously, lots of erosion, which is going to be a long-term effect. And from the perspective of environmental care of your property, that's something to think about, maybe even limiting your horse's access to wet property. But in some cases, it gets bad enough, particularly in flat areas such as Florida, you may have 3 inches of water. The horses don't have anything to eat, so you have to change your strategy as to what you're going to be feeding your horses. Maybe they're normally on grass, but now there's no access to the grass. Maybe there's, in some cases, like after hurricanes, there's too much salt in the water that floods into your property, and you don't want them to drink that water because it may lead to imbalances in their electrolytes, et cetera. So just as something as simple as lack of access to grazing, and then how you're going to mitigate that with hay or some other food stuff. Inability to water your animals. Just, in the case of a drought, you may lose. I have, what's funny is in the last week and a half in Georgia, where I normally live, we've gone from being in a serious drought situation over a week and a half to now approaching a flood stage. And up till 2 weeks ago, many of my friends in the area of Georgia that I live in were reporting dry wells. If you are dependent upon a dry well and don't have any other resource for water for your horses, obviously that goes from being something that we just sort of, no big deal, we always have water around, we sort of take it for granted, to, oh my goodness, I've got a serious concern here. And it's not like you can, if you don't have the facilities to deal with that, what are you going to be doing? Hauling 5-gallon buckets of water from your next-door neighbor? Are you going to be filling a 50-gallon agricultural tank in the back of your truck? What is your plan? And really that's what we do a lot in disaster preparedness, is trying to get people to have a plan, to think through how much water am I going to need, time, 10 gallons per day per horse, how many times do I have to transport water? It's simple math, but it can be pretty scary when you start talking about people that have 6, 8, 10, 12 horses times 10 or 20 gallons a day per water, et cetera. That's just a good example of how frustrating that can be.
Yeah, it's a lot of water. And in our area, our storms, during the summer, we have thunderstorms that are followed by wildfires. So that's another threat that we sometimes face when weather rolls in. And really scary, too. Not thinking about that too much this time of year, although you probably would recommend that people start thinking about it now.
Of course. That's what we actually, since you brought that up, FEMA has done some studies over the last 10, 15 years, realizing that the messages that we were putting out to the public in general, and this is for human as well as for animal disasters, they started realizing that most people hear blah, 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 and they think it's the same old, same old. They don't realize that it can happen to you too. So having ostrich syndrome and saying, well, that'll never happen to me because I live in Kentucky, I'm never affected by hurricanes, it can happen to you. And it's as simple as losing power. What are you going to do for your pump? It's as simple as providing water, the basics of things that your animals need. I always try to use the example of a lady that called us one time off of the horse.com blog that we do, and she said, we have 100 horses in our boarding facility, and we lost power, and that's 1,000 gallons per day. Where do you get 1,000 gallons of water? And what they did was they called the local fire department, which was very gracious about sending out a fire truck, but that's one fire truck. And so the scale, when we start talking, this is not puppies and kittens. When we start talking about logistics for large animals, it's large.
Significant. Now, you just recently did a blog post about hypothermia in horses, and I wanted to ask you, why is hypothermia a concern, and when is it a concern for our horses?
As I said before, and if you talk to your veterinarian, you'll find out most horses are very capable of dealing with cold, except under the situations of their coat being extremely wet and in a high wind environment and not being able to provide them a sufficient nutrition. Normally, their gut provides a lot of heat from the inside, and most horses in good body condition score of from a 4.5 up to, unfortunately, a 9, have plenty of fat to be able to provide insulation. But when they get trapped in a situation, and unfortunately in some situations with people, the way they maintain their horses, the horse can't get out of the wind, or the horse is soaking wet and can't get out of the situation it's in, and at some point it's not able to keep up with its body temperature regulation. Of course, from our perspective, we normally think of that for a horse that gets trapped in the mud or is down for some reason due to sickness, etc., and they lose their body temperature because the environment's pulling it out of them faster than they can actually produce it from the inside. So that's when we particularly see that, and we talk about hypothermia being something that you need to consider if an animal ends up in one of those situations. For example, goes through surface ice and ends up in your pond and can't get out by itself, or falls down in mud. Even in relatively warm temperatures, cold water will pull the body heat out of the horse faster than it can reproduce it itself. So that's something that we always try to get people to remember. Yes, it stood up and it ate some hay, but it probably needs to see a veterinarian to be treated in case of hypothermia.
So what mistakes do you commonly see horse owners making when it comes to dealing with extreme weather?
Well, I already mentioned the ostrich syndrome, so I won't harp on that one. But the consideration of, let's just take one example. People ask a lot about tornadoes, particularly this time of year. In fact, almost exactly 1 year ago, we had a spate of tornadoes going through the United States. So I'll mention that. We've done a couple blogs on that. Making that hard decision, do you leave them in or do you take them out? And sort of that depends upon your facilities. If you have a facility that has been engineered for higher wind events, i.e. a concrete block with hurricane strapping or heavy-duty strapping, that facility may be more appropriate to leave the animals in. But the average pole barn, the average lower quality or wooden structures probably aren't going to stand up to much more than a very low wind event, and so we normally recommend that you put the animals out. However, if you're putting them out in a half-acre paddock together and they have nowhere to go, then that makes it very difficult to make that decision. If you've got a 200-acre pasture where the animals can make the decision to hide themselves, essentially, they'll be fine. One of the things that we forget all the time is that animals have instincts that help them for millions of years to protect themselves, and one of them is they turn their butt cheeks into the wind. Their butt cheeks are muscular, they're large, and they can absorb what may look like horrific injuries into those butt muscles much better than they can if they were turned the other way around with their heart and their chest exposed. So they sort of take care of themselves, And those kinds of injuries can usually be treated by a veterinarian relatively easily. It's difficult to treat the injuries that occur when a barn collapses in a high wind event. Although, again, it's difficult to say, is that an EF3 tornado headed towards my barn or an EF5? Hopefully you're not standing there trying to make that decision. And the other thing I always try to remind people is, as much as we love our horses, your family is more important. It is more important to make sure that you've got a safe place for you and your family to hide or protect yourselves, interior room, well-structured room in a facility, than it is to be concerned about your horses, as sad as they may sound.
I was just going to say, I'm not determining that because I'm hiding in the basement.
Exactly. My parents have a root cellar out in Tennessee, and every once in a while they call me in the middle of a high wind event and call me, and I say, I'm not moving to Tennessee.
So is there any one thing that you would recommend that if you do nothing else, that you do this one thing to protect your horses in case of weather?
Buy a NOAA weather radio, one that is battery backup, so that you know what's going on. That is the gift that I give new friends when I meet them and they have horses and, a birthday or Christmas rolls around. That's the thing that I buy for somewhere between $15 and $35, depending on the quality of the radio you want. You can get that, put it in your barn, put one in your house, and it will automatically go off when you are impacted locally. You can also obviously get the ones on your smartphones and that kind of stuff, but a NOAA weather radio is the thing that's going to help you when the power goes out, still know what's going on around you, because we're so busy in our normal lives, we just don't have time to go check the weather today every 15 minutes. This is made to be able to warn you that it's coming.
Well, there you go. Find links to today's guests as well as lots more tips at horsetipdaily.com. Horse Radio Network has thousands of podcasts that you can listen to. Just go to horseradionetwork.com. You can listen on our free app for iPhone or Android. Search your app store for Horse Radio Network or subscribe via iTunes. This podcast was made possible through the generous support of Kentucky Performance Products and listeners like you. This is Coach Jen, and I'll be back soon with another tip. Until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.